We're coming back into the Torah. We started out looking at, the beginning, how in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, how the earth was chaos and waste, darkness was on the surface of the deep, and the Ruach Elohim was hovering upon the surface of the water. Now, this is the foundation. This is the opening statement of the explanation of this world. This is setting the stage for the world in this creation account. And it starts out, of course, with the world in its ideal state. But then it shows us what happens and why the world is the way it is today. It goes into its brokenness by the breaking of God's word. It goes into the depths that humanity, when it's in rebellion against God, just how far we will sink. To which it demands a response from Him. A response that is devastating. And in many ways, it recreates the world as it was known into what we see in our day. Unfortunately, sin, missing the mark, the breaking of the Torah, it didn't just stay on the other side of the flood. The sin hitched a ride with Noah and his family on the ark. It went with them. Sin survived the flood, and the spirit of sin endured in the hearts of humanity. And one thing that this demonstrates, that moment when we're looking at the first Torah portion with Noah, pouring out judgment did not solve the problem. The only way to rid the world of sin would be to get rid of all of humanity. And that was not His desire. Humanity in the image of God was demonstrated to be irreparably broken. And even a blameless man in his generation, even somebody like Noah, he still sinned, didn't he? Blameless does not mean sinless or perfect. And he even had passed on that sin to his children. So there was no easy fix for this brokenness, for this sin. You can either remove humanity from the earth, but you can't remove sin from humanity. Sin will always be there until a way is made for it to be removed from us. And when you follow up after the flood, after you see the generations of people that grew up after that, sin immediately put rebellion to God, rebellion against God and His ways, back on the agenda, back at the forefront of these things. And so they even built up a tower. This is in the section that we missed last week. But this tower gets built up to the heavens. And the way some people talk about it, they build up this tower as if they don't really believe God. They don't really trust that God, He made a promise. He put the rainbow in the sky and said, I'm never going to flood the earth again. And it's as if they don't believe Him, because in some ways they want to build a tower that reaches up to the heavens, as if they want to build something so high that it will remain above any waters, that He cannot judge them again. But instead of wiping them out again, the Creator separates them with the languages, just like He separated the waters, how He separated the land, the night and the day. He scatters those peoples all over the world into the nations, using the same term when He talks about scattering them. He uses the same term that He uses for Israel later when they sinned, when they were driven out of the land, when they were dispersed and scattered among the nations. There at the Tower of Babel, they are scattered so they cannot work together in rebellion against His command. They may not be able to talk to each other like they had before. They might not have shared that common language like they had before, but they were still alive. And so God, dealing with humanity, He does something different. He takes one man Just like he had taken, one man with Noah, he does it different this time. He takes this one man and he calls him out of that larger field of humanity in order to place the man in that land of promise, in what is, essentially back into a garden of promise. If you weren't here within the last year and a half or so, when we were going through the books of Hebrews, when we were going through Galatians, this Torah portion for this week is one of the most essential readings you can have. Because this Torah portion is referenced extensively by both of those New Testament books, by Galatians, by Hebrews, and they are key. What's in this section is key to their central points about the high priesthood of Messiah and about our justification before God. And so here in Genesis 12 through 17 with Abram, he is taking what is essentially the first step of the gospel. The good news of humanity's redemption. Just one man, just one family that will then in turn benefit all of humanity, even all of those divided nations that were experiencing his judgment. The redemption of a family, a nation, and the nations. In Genesis chapter 12, verse 1, he says, Then Adonai said to Abram, Get going out from your land and from your relatives, from your father's house, to the land that I will show you. Go out. Leave. This is, in many ways, it's very similar to how the Great Commission gets started, right? With a similar word, a similar concept. What's the first word in the Great Commission? Go. It's go. Here it is, lech lecha. And when you think about go, when you are going, when you are getting out, this is not just a one-time decision, is it? It is a constant decision. With every step that you take in God's direction, it requires that you continue making that decision to keep going. Because if you decide to change your mind, what are you going to do? You're going to turn around and you're going to go back. So to go and to keep going, and as you go, you're constantly choosing to obey that command to go. This is not a one-time decision. At some point, in order to follow the call of God, to be a part of what is His redemptive plan, we're going to have to go sometime. We're going to have to get going with a sense of urgency at times. You're going to have to leave maybe the common path. You're going to have to leave maybe the normal or even the expected way of doing things. Because God doesn't do things the normal way. This world has plenty of ordinary lives that line up perfectly with an agenda that doesn't accomplish much for him or his kingdom. With an agenda that does not have the work of God at its core. God will at some point call each of us to go against the normal and the regular paths of life. He'll call you to go against the current. He will disrupt your plans and change your life. And He doesn't always feel the need to give you all the details of what that means, what that's going to look like, and where exactly you're going to be, what exactly you're going to be doing. He says, go to the land that I will show you. Sometimes that land might be not far from where you are. It might be Jerusalem. It might be Judea. Sometimes it might be Samaria. And sometimes it might be to the ends of the earth. But a lot of times you're not going to hear anything about the destination. It's not going to be fully revealed until you do what? Until you go. Until you get going. Until you continue to go. You're not going to get all those details and all that information until you start to obey. Because if you never start to obey, guess what you're never going to find out about? Where you're going. Why tell you if you don't start taking some steps? See, as much as this is a call to Abram, it's a lot like that Great Commission. It is a commission for him. He is called to go out, to leave where he's at, to leave his land, his relatives, his father's house. And along the way, something's going to happen. Along the way, Abram is going to be growing. Abram is going to be made into something. He is going to be made into, as a disciple of Adonai, as he is going to be making disciples in his name. He is going to become something much bigger than he is by himself, something much bigger than his immediate responsibility. He's going to be made into this great nation. And he said, our redemption starts like that. Our redemption starts with the call and the invitation of God. The call and the invitation to him and to his kingdom. That's where our redemption starts. Abram's going to do things God's way. Not continue going and doing his own thing. Not continuing to go in rebellion against God, which was exactly what Nimrod had been doing, which were those ones that were there before the tower. People like Nimrod, people like those that were building the Tower of Babel, thought that they could defy God, thought they could live and rebel against him. They thought they could go their own way, do their own thing, rise in opposition to him. And that was how, in doing all of that, in that pride, in that defiance, in that rebellion, they thought that this is the way we're going to make a name for ourselves. We're going to get a name. We're going to elevate our name without him. In Genesis 11:4 says, "Then they said, 'Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower whose top reaches into heaven. So let's make a name for ourselves, or else we will be scattered over the face of the whole land.'" So this moment typifies how we tend to think, what comes naturally to us. Typifies the basic principles of this world in the human experience, which is rebellion against God, going our own way, doing what seems right in our own eyes. Our name, we'd love to see and make our name reach the heavens. There's a lot of people when they ask, would you rather be rich or would you rather be famous? Well, a lot of people will say, I'd rather be famous. I'd rather everybody know who I am. I think those people are crazy. And the ones whose name and the people who are famous, I think they're pretty crazy, right? But our name is not going to reach heaven. Our name is never going to survive before the throne of God based on us building ourselves up there. Climbing the beanstalk, so to speak. The Father is the one who must lift us up. He is the one who must make a way. That's what he promises Abram. Get going from your land, all those things, to the land I will show you. And he says, this is what I want to do. My heart's desire is to make you into a great nation, to bless you, and to do what? To make your name great. Not for your own self, not for your own benefit, but so that you may be a blessing. What Nimrod wanted most, an elevated and exalted name, was God willing to do that? Is he willing to elevate our name and lift us up? Yes. God is willing to provide that. See, Abram's name would be made great, greater than anything he could have accomplished, Nimrod could have accomplished, anything they tried to do through defiance. He wasn't going to get there through defiance. He was going to get there. His name was going to be elevated through obedience, through humbling himself before God and his ways, by voluntarily blessing the Lord, blessing Adonai, voluntarily bending the knee. Because if you try to lift yourself up, you will find that God is going to be knocking you down. That's what happened at the tower. That's also what James tells us, Jacob, in chapter 4. Verse 6, the second part of that says, therefore it says, God opposes the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. Nimrod and those at the tower experienced that. They experienced what it looks like when there is opposition from God. But verse 10 says, humble yourselves in the sight of Adonai. And what does he do? He lifts us up. He lifts us up. Everything that Nimrod was trying to accomplish on his own, God is willing to do. But it comes through obedience, not defiance. A humble person kneels before their king. God gives grace to those who are humble before him, and he makes their name grace. He gives a name, and he writes a name upon us that no one knows but him. The Father will make them into a great and powerful nation. The Father makes Abram into this great and powerful nation, a great kingdom with the greatest king. That is the redemption. That is the plan that God has had. God's agenda in and through this man Abram and his offspring is the key for all of humanity's redemption. Again, my desire is to bless those who bless you, but whoever curses you, I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. See, he was going to make his name great so he can be a blessing. And then how other people respond to that. And what he is doing through Abram can change and affect their life and their experience and what they go through. One way or another, God evaluates a person, evaluates a people, evaluates a nation by how they treat and respond to what God is doing in Abram and his descendants. It is in our best interest to seek to bless those physical descendants of Abraham, to seek the best for them, to seek ways that we can bless them, because we actually benefit from that. We benefit from them. We are still benefiting from Abram's decision, aren't we? When he first decided to go and leave his land, his father, his father's family, his relatives, all those things, we're still experiencing blessing from that decision. To hear and obey the call of God. But God says and promises that he will bless those who bless Abram and join themselves unto him. And we've looked at this before. The word bless, or barach, to bless or to be blessed, which also means to cause to prosper, to praise, or acknowledge and salute, also means to kneel or cause to kneel. Again, that's why you often see people bowing when it says Baruch atah Adonai, blessed are you, bending the knee. That's kind of used in the context of what they do when a camel is brought to a stop and they're trying to get people on and off for the ride. But there is this curse for those who are against Abram. There's a curse for those who are against what God is doing in him and through him. That word is kalal, to curse or to treat with contempt, to bring contempt or dishonor, to basically to be slight or to render insignificant kind of thing, to be swift in the sense of being short-lived or easily forgotten, to be trifling or of little account. Oh, you can't see that down there. So how you treat Abram and his descendants makes a difference in what you will experience in this life and how God moves in his life, in your life, in the life of a people, in the life of a nation. To treat the Jewish people well, to seek their prospering, is to demonstrate that we actually want to be a part, that we have an understanding of the redemptive plan that God started here in chapter 12, here with Abraham. But to treat the Jewish people poorly, to treat them with contempt, to dishonor them, is to demonstrate that you don't really want to be a part of what God is doing, or that you don't really have an understanding of that redemptive plan that God started back here in chapter 10 or 12. And that's what makes what I shared, last week, just about our reputation here at Restoration, just so baffling sometimes. With that, if you remember back when it was going through the common questions, what was one of the questions is, well, are you trying to be what? Are you trying to be Jewish? And what's implied in that question is that there's something wrong with being Jewish. Right? Y'all remember talking about that? And then the complaint that the reputation that we have, that is a complaint by those. The other side is like, well, you're too Jewish in what you do. Yeah, we do too many things like they do them. We follow, the calendar that they do. We do the blessings or the liturgy that they do. Right? And for some reason that's considered bad. That's considered wrong. And again, as we were talking about with the common question, there is nothing wrong with being Jewish, is there? Not that we're trying to be Jewish, but there wouldn't be anything wrong with being Jewish anyway. And it amazes me, and it saddens me that there's a growing number, there's in a movement that seeks to return to the Torah, in a movement that seeks to go to the feasts of the Lord, that it baffles me how that movement can become increasingly hostile or contemptuous or dishonoring or that anything that smells of being too Jewish. That makes no sense to me, how that works. And it's just like Satan to take something that is supposed to be good, which is, a return to the Torah, a return to the Sabbath, a return to the feast, that wants to identify with the tribes or something like that, and take that and make it hostile to the Jewish people, to make it essentially anti-Semitic. That's exactly what the enemy would like to do. But we have to understand that that is our enemy's goal in doing that. That Satan, actually, he wants to remove any blessing from God in this movement that's happening among the Gentiles. He wants to keep us divided from each other. See, we need to understand, can you imagine what it's like if you're keeping the Torah, honoring the Sabbath, keeping the feasts, but you're not receiving any blessing from doing them? That's what you get if there is an anti-Semitic heart in what we are doing. How we treat the Jewish people, our attitude toward that faith that they've been living for thousands of years longer than we have, makes a difference in the blessing that we experience in coming this way. That doesn't mean that we blindly accept everything that the Jewish people do. We don't just copy every tradition or obey every rabbinic word, but neither do we automatically reject those things as some are doing. We test everything and do what? With the good. You test everything and you hold on to those things which are good. For example, I've spoken to those who want to keep the Passover, but they don't want to do anything that is like a Seder with the meal. And I've keep sitting there. I was like, okay, so what exactly do you do to keep the Passover if you don't want the Seder to be a part of it? See, they don't realize that even many rabbis, they're starting to come to understand that the earliest written record of a Seder meal, guess where you find it? In the New Testament, what we call the Last Supper. That many elements of the modern Seder meal that the Jewish people have been doing for 1,000 years are present there in the pages of the New Testament. That the Messianic believers appear to be the ones who, with the greatest influence on the modern Jewish practice. And that's something else. But how we treat, how we bless, or how we curse, if we choose to do that, the Jewish people today will be the defining issue in the days to come as we approach the coming of the Lord. It will define nations. It will divide nations. You know, for a little while there, when there was a change in government over in England, some of them were talking about, well, we need to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Did y'all remember hearing about that? Well, that was undone 2 days ago. They're no longer even going to consider that as an option. When you look at things like the United Nations, when you look at various other non-government agencies out there, you know who they condemn the most in the world? They condemn Israel the most. The world, it will become increasingly hostile toward the Jewish people and anything that reminds them of it. The Jewish people become increasingly blamed for the world's problems. Has that been coming up in the news at all lately? The last couple of weeks? From celebrities, from sports stars, peddling those ideas lately or anything? You know, there's an article talking about anti-Semitism, and they have the data from 2021. It says the Anti-Defamation League published this past April found that incidences of anti-Semitism reached an all-time high in the United States in 2021 with a total of 2,717 incidents of assault, harassment, and vandalism reported. If that's the number that is reported, do you think the number is higher or lower in reality? It's probably a lot higher. And not everything got reported. It says, according to the Anti-Defamation League, this was the highest number of incidents reported in over 40 years, averaging out to nearly 7 per day. It also marked a 34% increase from 2020. And I think we're on the way to passing that this year. In the last week or so, there were banners that were hung in Los Angeles over a freeway saying that Kanye was right about the Jews. There was another one in Jacksonville, Florida over I-10 that said, end Jewish supremacy in America and honk if you know it's the Jews. That's here. And it's worse in Europe. You're right. And this even infects the traditional church. And again, as we've already been talking about, it infects those that are in among the Torah movements as well. It's infecting the Torah movement so much that perhaps we should consider giving a little extra thought to perhaps reinterpreting some of the passages out of Revelation that you see. You know, I've always understood these certain passages a certain way, but Revelation chapter 2, verse 9, it says, I know your tribulation and your poverty, yet you are rich, as well as the slander of those who say they are Jewish and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. And then verse chapter 3, I will cause those of the synagogue of Satan who say they are Jewish and are not, but lie, Behold, I will cause them to come and bow down before your feet, so that they acknowledge that I have loved you. Maybe we need to reassess what that means, or what that might mean. Even just this last couple of days, I heard that there were some incidences up in the Northeast somewhere where the synagogues are up there were warned to be on the alert for something happening on Shabbat. So the world, even people who claim to know and love Yeshua, those as part of the traditional church, are going to be divided over the Jewish people. And I know that's a little bit of of what they call the rabbi trail. But I think that needed to be said, and that needed to be addressed. Because the world out there may or may not confuse us and what we're doing and come after us with the same kind of anger, vitriol, because they're not going to know the difference. Sometimes we need to know what we're getting ourselves into, right? We need to understand that this is the course, the pattern that God has established for world history, what he is doing here in the life of Abram, because God's desire, again, is to make a great nation of Abram's descendants, and through them to bring blessing to the world. And so it's something that was happening in his day, but it's also something that's there in the future, right? Whoever curses you, I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. That's not going to happen necessarily in Abram's lifetime. That's a promise of something that's going to happen in that future. After God has redeemed his descendants from Egypt. It's going to be some 400 years later before that kind of blessing is going to be spreading around. It's going to include the giving of the Torah at Sinai. Was that supposed to be a blessing not just for the Jewish people, but also for the nations? Yes. They were supposed to look at the laws and the Torah given to them and say, wow, this nation is great. How can we be a part? How can we join ourselves with this nation? Sending Messiah Yeshua, was that supposed to be a blessing to the nations? I sure hope so. And both of those, the giving of the Torah and the giving and sending of Messiah, are examples of God's blessing and God's grace. That's the case that is made in John. Out of his fullness we have all received grace on top of grace. Two examples of grace. Torah was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Yeshua, the Messiah. So how we bless the people, the Abram's descendants, really reveals the heart and how our response is to that redemptive plan of God, to those gifts of his grace. If there is an increased rejection of the gospel in a people, in a culture, if there's an increased rejection of his word and his truth, what's going to happen towards the hostility towards Abram's descendants? Is it also going to increase? You bet it is. There is a direct relationship to a rejection of the gospel, a rejection of that truth, a rejection of that redemptive plan, and a hostility toward his people. It reveals how we respond to his Torah and to his Messiah. Because both Jewish and Gentile enter into relationship with God the same way that Abram did, by faith in his promise, by faith in the word that he gave, by faith in his plan of redemption. Genesis 15:6. Then Abram, he believed in Adonai, and he reckoned it to him as righteousness. Righteousness was credited to him. Righteousness from another source other than Abram himself. Paul states in Galatians that Abraham was shown something in this moment. He was shown something in this moment. He was shown a future in which physical children of Abraham and spiritual children of Abraham were united together in the Messiah. Galatians chapter 3, verse 6. Just as Abraham believed God and it was credited to him as righteousness, know then that those who have faith are children of Abraham. So it's something even more and greater and bigger than just being a physical descendant. Know then that those who have faith are children of Abraham. The scriptures, foreseeing that God would justify, make right before God, the Gentiles by faith, proclaimed the good news to Abraham. He heard it. He saw it. And that all happened in advance, saying, all the nations shall be blessed through you. In that moment of faith and trust, when Abram believed God, he was also believing what God said he would do in giving him descendants, physical descendants, that would inherit the promise of that land. But he was also promising what he was going to do off into the future. See, God speaks symbolically of people who will be Abram's descendants and be inheritors of the promise of blessing in two ways. Again, you could argue that both the physical descendants and the spiritual descendants are symbolically represented in this Torah portion. You look in Genesis 13, verse 15. For all the land that you are looking at, I will give to you and to your seed forever. I will make your seed like the dust of the earth, so that if one could count the dust of the earth, then your seed could also be counted. The word dust here is the same word. It's first used in Genesis chapter 2, verse 7. It's the same word that when our Creator formed Adam out of what? The dust of the ground. You could argue that these are the physical descendants of Abram, and they will be an uncountable number. But you look in chapter 15, and you see how Abram describes or God describes Abram's descendants again, using another symbolic reference. When Abram was concerned about who would inherit his household, God said, he took him outside. He said, look up now at the sky and count the stars. If you are able to count them, then he said to him, so shall your seed be. And then he believed in Adonai, and he reckoned it to him as righteousness. These are the descendants of Abram. When you look up there, they're counted up there in the heavens. Symbolically, these could be those spiritual descendants of Abraham who are his children by faith in the one descendant, the one seed that comes from Abraham. Children not defined by a physical connection, not by a bloodline, not by the dust, so to speak, but by receiving Yeshua as the Messiah. Whoever did receive him, to those trusting in his name. Oh, did y'all not see that? Look up now at the sky and count the stars. Sorry, I didn't know if that wasn't up there or not. Those who trusting in his name, to these he gave the right. It didn't come naturally to become children of God. They were born not of a bloodline, nor of human desire, nor of man's will, but of God. Now I say that I wouldn't get in too much of an argument over that or fight too hard over that kind of interpretation, but it's just one of those that goes like, that's an interesting possibility. But the Jewish people, the physical descendants, the spiritual descendants, the Gentiles, the Gentiles are not really recognized on earth as descendants as such. But we come together to form one nation with both the physical and spiritual descendants, because Abram, when the sign of the covenant was given, when he was renamed Abraham, what does Abraham mean? He was the father of a multitude of nations, right? For my part, because my covenant is with you, you will be the father of a multitude of nations. No longer will your name be Abram, but your name will be Abraham. because I make you the father of a multitude of nations. Yes, I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make you into nations, and kings will come forth from you. You want to take a guess what that word there in Hebrew is? It's goy, goyim. That's usually a word reserved for Gentiles. But in that redemptive future, Abraham is going to be shown that the mystery of God is the coming together of those physical and those spiritual descendants by believing God, just as Abraham did. That's how we come together. That's what we unite around. We believe in that redemptive plan of God that he starts, that we start seeing come together here in this Torah portion. His descendants coming together under the terms and the promise of the Abrahamic covenant. You know, that Abrahamic covenant is the covenant of our redemption that we see. It starts up in chapter 15. It's the terms of how we are redeemed from slavery, just like the Israelites were from Egypt, because we are justified by our faith, by believing. Just as Galatians argues, saved by grace through faith under the terms of this Abrahamic covenant. Because the Mosaic covenant, the Torah, where that was given, does that have anything to do with our salvation? No. The Torah was not given before our redemption, or before the redemption of the Israelites. The Torah was given after their redemption. The Torah comes after our salvation. Abraham's descendants are described as, as the dust and the stars. If you're thinking that's too much of a stretch, to make the distinction into Jew and Gentile, just keep in mind what Hebrews points out about Yeshua himself. Because it does make some points about Yeshua that it depends on his location and where he's at. Where is Yeshua serving right now? Is he serving at an earthly tabernacle or temple? No. He is serving where? At a heavenly tabernacle. And if Yeshua were on earth, could he be a priest? No. Why not? Because on earth, the priests have to come from the tribe of the Levites. He has to be a descendant of Aaron. But in heaven, up where the stars are, Yeshua is a priest. That's the whole point that Hebrews makes. Here is the main point being said. We do have such a Kohen Gadol. We do have such a high priest who has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of the majesties in the heavens. He is a priestly attendant of the holies and the true tent which Adonai set up, and not man. Now, if he were on earth, he would not be a priest, a Kohen at all, since there are those who offer the gifts according to the Torah. They offer service in a replica and a foreshadower of the heavenlies. So again, based on the physical descent, Yeshua could not be a priest down here. But this Torah portion is what the writer of Hebrews draws from to show that Yeshua is a priest after all. He does have a priesthood that is even greater than this one. This Torah portion provides the reassurance that Yeshua is everything that we need him to be in order to secure our salvation. Hebrews chapter 7, I'm going to go through this here. For this Melchizedek was king of Salem, Cohen of God Most High. He met Abraham returning from the defeat of the kings and blessed him. And to him Abraham apportioned a tenth of everything. First, by the translation of his name, he is king of righteousness, and then also king of Salem, which is king of shalom, king of peace. Seem to be missing the rest of those verses. Well, when you look back in chapter 6, verse 19, he says, "We have this hope as an anchor of the soul, both firm and steady, a hope that enters the inner place behind the curtain. Yeshua has entered there as a forerunner on our behalf, having become the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, forever, according to the order of Melchizedek." That's the problem. They got out of order. But he is a priest in the order of Melchizedek. So he was the priest of God Most High, King of righteousness, King of Shalom. He says, without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but made like the Son of God, Ben Elohim, he remains a priest, a Kohen, for all time. And again, this is a central part of the argument in the book of Hebrews. Now see how great this man is. Even Abraham, the patriarch, gave him a tenth out of the plunder. Indeed, those sons of Levi who received the priesthood later have, according to Torah, a command to collect a tithe from the people, that is, from their kin, although they have come out of the loins of Abraham, even though they are equally children of and descendants of Abraham. But this one who did not have their genealogy has collected tithes from Abraham and has blessed him, the one holding the promises. Now it is beyond dispute that the lesser is blessed by the greater. So Melchizedek is even greater than Abraham. And so we see that this Torah portion is central to what the writer of Hebrews, what Paul says in Galatians. They obviously spend a lot of time in this Torah portion. Yeshua is our King of righteousness. He is our righteous King. He is the King of peace. Or we see it in Isaiah, he's called the Prince of Peace, right? It is his righteousness that is credited to us. It is he that has brought us peace with God. It is he that Abraham saw when the good news, when the gospel was proclaimed to him in advance in that Hebrews chapter 3. What we read just a little while ago in John chapter 8, for your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day. He saw it and was glad, was thrilled. Yeshua, our great high priest, oversaw that establishment, that institution of the Abrahamic covenant, because this obscure moment in the heart of this Torah portion, when Lot, Abram's nephew, who had wandered away from God's path, who saw all of those enticing things, those lush things of the world, and he started compromising, going a little bit further every day, taking another step further and further away, going closer and closer each day towards Sodom and that way of life. When he was captured, when he was carried off by invaders, because they could not distinguish between Lot and anything or anybody or citizen of Sodom and Gomorrah. They looked the same. But Abram and his men go back and go forth and rescue them. They're on their way home when Melchizedek makes his one and only appearance in Genesis 14. Now, after he returned from defeating Kedorlaomer, I always say that bad, and the kings who were with him, the kings of Sodom, went out to meet him in the valley of Shaveh, that is the king's valley. Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine, and he was a priest of El Elyon. He was a king and a priest. And interesting that, these other kings that came out against Sodom and Gomorrah and these other towns, they didn't apparently try to come and take Jerusalem. They didn't try to take and defeat Melchizedek. But he was a priest of El Elyon, God Most High. He blessed him and said, "Blessed be Abram by El Elyon, creator of heaven and earth. And blessed be El Elyon, who gave over your enemies into your hand." And then Abram gave him a tenth of everything. But Melchizedek brings out bread and the wine, elements of a covenant meal. He breaks this bread. He shares this wine. He is the one clearly officiating this meeting. He is clearly the one in charge. And unlike, what Abram is not necessarily the most trusting person, the most willing to shake hands, so to speak, because just a verse later, when the king of Sodom comes and tries to assert himself into the situation, how is that received? No, I don't want anything to do with you. I don't want anything to do with your stuff. He doesn't want to have any kind of suggestion that he had a relationship with or that Sodom contributed anything to him. So Abram knows how to distinguish between good and evil. And when he sees something evil, he wants nothing to do with it. But he receives Melchizedek's ministry without question, without hesitation. He gives him a tenth of everything. It's almost as if he recognized Melchizedek. He recognized his ministry. He recognized his authority, recognizing the important role that he was playing in the redemptive plan of God. And that's why many argue, and I tend to agree, that this is Yeshua on the scene. And Abram recognized him because that is the gospel that he was shown ahead of time and what he's been believing in, what he's been trusting in. It's like, oh yeah, I know you. I know who you are. The very next chapter is when the Abrahamic covenant was cut. And Melchizedek was the one who was that mediator, essentially, of that covenant. The covenant of our salvation is played out here in these chapters and deserves a much closer look. Because it's not about us going our own way, our own path, like Lot, because not all paths are going to lead to God. They don't lead to righteousness. They don't all lead to holiness. Neither is our salvation about us. Is that about us trying to figure it out, to make it happen on our own wisdom or our own ability, like Sarah does with Hagar here in this section? Because we'll only produce an imposter. Will only produce a false salvation like Ishmael that actually wars against the true son of promise. All of which people are still falling for. They're all still trying to do in some form or another today. Going their own way in compromise and some false spirituality that draws them closer and closer to the rebellion and the behavior of Sodom and Gomorrah. Or they are the desire to try to manufacture a false Messiah, which if you've been listening to any of the news and things coming out of Israel, there are some which are saying that they expect Israel to name the Messiah soon. They say they've been talking to him, and they know his name and his identity. In contrast to that way of Nimrod, in contrast to that kind of rebellion, we need to look to the redemptive plan of God that has been known and prepared from the foundation of the world. That started with a family, then a nation, and then all the nations receiving blessing from it. Coming to Jerusalem, where the spiritual children are taking hold of the tzitzit of the physical children and going with them because we have heard that God is with them. That's the redemptive plan, and that's always been the redemptive plan. And may we truly be a part of that Abrahamic covenant by faith in what Abraham was looking forward to and rejoicing. Our great high priest, in the order of Melchizedek, Messiah Yeshua, our King of righteousness, our King of peace. And may we speak boldly in this salvation in his name. For his name is what is exalted, even much greater than anything that we should try to exalt ourselves. It's his name that needs to be lifted high. Acts chapter 4, Peter talks about it like this: let it be known to all of you and to all the people of Israel that by the name of Yeshua HaMashiach from Nazareth, HaNazrati, whom you had crucified, whom God raised from the dead, this one stands before you whole. This Yeshua is the stone rejected by you, the builders, that has become the chief cornerstone, for there is salvation in no one else. For there is no other name under heaven given to mankind by which we must be saved. There will never be a name that is exalted higher than his name. No one will ever build a tower tall enough, great enough, high enough to surpass his name. And instead, at the name of Yeshua, what happens instead? Every knee doesn't get built up in that respect. Every knee bows before him. That's the message that we are commissioned to live by. That is what we must be willing to go and share. Be willing to leave our land, our relatives, and our Father's house. That's the only way that we humble ourselves before him, and so we see ourselves lifted up in due time.